Hi everybody, Dan Illman, Matt Bernier, taking a look at race number 10 at the fairgrounds on Saturday. It's the Grade 2 $400,000 Orleans Handicap. Let's take a peek at this field. Matt, your morning line favorite is the number 6, Silver Dust, as we go 1 1/8. And this horse is a problem child at the gate, to say the least, but he's also a winner. He's taken 3 out of his last 4 and has been on the board in his last 6.
You know, the interesting thing, too, about Silver Dust, this was a horse that for a long, long time had a little bit of buzz behind him early on as a 3-year-old. Some people thought that he might end up being a serious 3-year-old there in 2017. For one reason or another, it didn't work out. And it just feels like he has been one of those kind of project horses where it took a long time for them to get him together. But most importantly, take a note, he was gelded over the summer of last year. And that, to me, sort of signified the real uptick in his consistency. You're right, he's a pain in the neck coming out of the gate, but he's very, very consistent, and he won what looks to be a relatively decent addition to the mine shaft most recently.
Yeah, not only did Flame Away come back to win a stakes race with a low to mid 90 buyer speed figure, also beat 3 of these common foes. Are you worried about the 9 furlongs for Silver Dust? Thus far in his career, he's been at his best, mile and a 1/16.
Yeah, I mean, to date, I think I am a little bit, but at the same time, I do wonder if it goes a little bit more to that idea that perhaps this is a new horse that we're dealing with, and they've only predominantly campaigned him at these sort of 8.5, 8 furlong distances. Now you get him out a little bit longer. This is going to be the test. 1
1/8 really the key, I think, for the 10 Copper Bullet, who began his career as a crack sprinter for trainer Steve Asmussen. They tried him 2 turns for the first time, most recently in the Grade 3 Razorback Handicap at Oaklawn Park, and he just caught a red-hot Todd Pletcher horse named Cold Front. Copper Bullet finished ahead of 3 next out winners that day with a game runner-up effort. The 7th place runner coming back to earn a buyer speed figure of 96 when winning the Kentucky Cup Classic. This horse can be close to the pace, but I just have to admit the 9 worries me, and I'm a fan of this horse.
No, I agree. The talent has always been there. Nobody's ever questioned that. The distance, though, it seems a little bit, I don't want to say peculiar, but they've clearly maintained him at shorter distances in the past. Now you get the acid test. The question is, do you want to take a shorter price at a horse that is kind of an unknown at this distance?
I want to throw up the Timeform US pace projector for this race because there's going to be a key scratch lightly, and that is the number 7 Noble Commander is expected to defect from this race and remain in Southern California. He was expected what was projected to be a fast pace on the pace projector. Great thing about Timeform US pace projectors are after scratches are officially announced, this pace projector will update. It will have Mr. Buff, the number 8, on the lead. If that red bar's still there, things might set up real nicely for the number 2 Lone Sailor going out for trainer Tom Amoss. This horse ran a better than it looked 6th in the Breeders' Cup Classic at almost 100-1 2 starts back, and in his first start of the year, the Mine Shaft Handicap, he ran okay, but something tells me he needed that race.
I was going to say he probably needed one, shake the rust off a little bit. Now you're going to get a forward move here. Admittedly, I've never really loved this horse. He's 2 of 16 lifetime. I think he's a little bit difficult to trust. I'd be curious to know if at some point they wanted to try a different sort of configuration with him. I understand maybe this 1 1/8 is what most people think that he wants, and based on what he's done so far, I can't really argue with that. But there's a part of me that wonders, you know, if this doesn't work, do you try to turn him into a closing sprinter or something along those lines? Because, again, he is consistent, but he doesn't really love to win races.
You look at the fractions of the Mine Shaft, however, they went 25-4 for the opening quarter, 50-3 for the half, and Lone Sailor, a 1-run closer, is trying to rally from last. It's a daunting task to be sure, and if that red bar does hold up after the scratch of the 7, Lone Sailor might get a 180-degree different scenario, and he's got a formulator fact to boot for trainer Tom Amoss. Over the past year, with horses aged 4-year-olds and up, going second off the layoff in dirt routes, 36% winners, a 282 ROI. This horse should be running hard on the stretch, but Matt makes a good point. 5 seconds from 16 lifetime starts. Let's talk a little bit about Lone Sailor's next door neighbor to the outside. That's the number 3 Super Tappet, winner of the Sunshine Millions Classic 2 starts back. And in the Razorback most recently, I didn't think he had the greatest trip in the world. He kind of ran evenly. I'm going to give him that race. I like him at 1 1/8, and I know he can be closer to the pace.
Yeah, so here's the interesting thing. To me, I always wondered all along if that run 3 starts back off the turf, was the light bulb going on? Now, that was a 1-turn mile coming off the grass. He comes back and runs as well as he did in the Sunshine Millions at 9 furlongs, and I think immediately that made it seem more likely that, you know what, the distance wasn't the thing. It wasn't a matter of him turning back. That wasn't what sort of woke him up. I still want to see him go back to 1 turn because that, to me, is far and away, I get it. It was against a field of turf horses and 2X level. That to me was far and away the best race he's ever run. That Sunshine Millions was not bad. Don't get me wrong. And you're right, the Razorback, for a number of reasons, it didn't work out. Look, he can go out there and win this race on Saturday. It wouldn't stun me. I would still love to see them give him another chance going one turn.
Wonder if Peter Urton's going to have the 11 core beliefs ready to go for his first start as a 4-year-old. This will also be his first start against older horses, and he is stuck with a lousy outside post position. This horse mid-moved in the Pennsylvania Derby. He was probably in way too tough against the likes of McKinsey that day, probably way too tough in the Haskell Invitational 2 starts back. In the Ohio Derby, he was wider than wide pretty much all the way around the track, and he was still able to get up over Lone Sailor. To me, distance isn't going to be an issue for core beliefs, but for a horse that's been preparing in Southern California, and we all know the yips that's been going on there with the training schedule, I wonder if core beliefs is a horse that, like Lone Sailor last time, needs a race off the bench.
Yeah, it's entirely possible, and you're right. You have to factor in the situation in Southern California with any of these horses coming out of there. Admittedly, though, he's the kind of horse, when I looked at the overall body of this field, I said, I don't really trust anyone in here. There's a number of horses that can win, but I don't want any of them at too short a price. Core beliefs, at least to me, he's a little bit unexposed. You're right, first-time winners, or first time against older horses, excuse me, off this layoff. But there's still a part of me that thinks if he runs as well as he did in the Ohio Derby as a 3-year-old, perhaps he can take a step forward here in a pretty significant way as a 4-year-old, but you have to factor in the California issues.
We're filming this preview on Wednesday afternoon. As of this filming, the 9 Bandua, the connections, 50-50. They're thinking maybe they'll take a shot on dirt with this horse who has competed exclusively on the turf in his career, and he broke my heart last time out in the Fairgrounds Handicap when I needed him at 35-1, and Synchrony ran him down. I look at this pedigree, and I just don't see it, Matt. He's by the Factor, who we all know could run on dirt, but has been a kind of a turfy sire. The Dam won exclusively on turf. This horse is a half the tail of a champion in Mr. Rory, both graded stakes winners on the turf. The Dam's a half to a stakes place dirt miler. This is the female family of Stormcat, but it's a lot of turf, and I'm not sure this horse is running, so I think he's going to get outrun on dirt.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. Like you say, he's more forward when he's on grass, but this is going to be a totally different ball game for him. To be fair, I have to be honest. If I was the connections, I would run in this spot, just simply because if everyone that's supposed to run in that Mervyn Muniz shows up, you're more likely than not running for third money in there because you've got Synchrony, who handled you last time. You have Bricks and Mortar, who won the Pegasus World Cup on grass. I would take a shot, if you're going to take a shot, to find out. This feels to me like a pretty good opportunity to just find out if this is something he can handle or not.
Like several horses coming out of the mine shaft, the 5 Crew Chief didn't seem to appreciate trying to rally from near the back of the pack. Considering those tepid fractions, he really wanted to go early. He wasn't allowed to do so. His prior form was good, but like a couple of others in this race, he's got a case of seconditis.
Yeah, a bit of a nibbler here, 11 times second and third from 27 lifetime starts, only 3 victories. He's the kind of horse to me you use underneath. And
Mo Don't Know is just a cool Ohio bred. He's won 17 of 32 starts, 25 times in the money. In the mine shaft last time out, he was wide off of that slow pace, but he was also 51-1 that day, and he sort of retreated to the back of the pack. He has now finished last in his last 3 races.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any coincidence that they're the 3 races he's been tested in. Now, look, he's been thrown into all sorts of different situations in those 3 races, but at the same time, I do wonder if this is just too much.
Let's take a look at our top selections for the Grade 2 Orleans Handicap at the Fairgrounds on Saturday. I'm very happy with the scratch of the 7 Noble Commander because there's a chance now that the 8 Mr. Buff will be able to clear off to the early lead. And Mr. Buff has just been a revelation for trainer John Kimmel. He's won his last 4 starts, and he seems to excel at this 1 1/8 distance. Now, while last time out he was the recipient of a nice, easy, uncontested lead on a slow pace in the Jazzle, 2 starts back in the Alex M. Robb, according to Timeform US, it was a different situation. Red color-coded fractions. He did all the dirty work, and he still held on to win. This horse is in good form. John Kimmel's been tearing it up at Gulfstream. He sends this horse here to the Fairgrounds.
Yeah, and you know what? The form of that Jazzle has held up pretty well. You haven't really had a ton of next out winners, but you've had a number of speed figures between low 90 and mid 90, and I think that bodes well coming in here. And like you said, you're right. He had a pretty easy go of it on the front end. The run 2 and 4 starts back, those were legitimate fractions. He's out there cutting them out at 9 furlongs. The distance isn't an issue, and you're right. If everything shakes down the way it looks with the 7 withdrawing, Mr. Buff, I think, should be out there on the front end. We'll find out if he's good enough to handle this company and the ship.
Will your top pick bust my chops early? That's the 4 Noble Indy, last year's Louisiana Derby winner, returning to the scene of that big performance. He was gelded over the winter. He came back in a no-hoper spot. 6 furlong race, A, way too short. B, XY Jet, way too tough. C, not a lot of pace to run at. XY Jet loose on the lead. From a fitness standpoint, Noble Indy should be ready to rumble off that race. He is stretching out to a more appropriate distance. Where do you have Johnny V placing this horse early? Is he going to try to make the top in here? Or do you think he's going to settle in behind Mr. Buff? Sort of like a similar trip as the Louisiana Derby last year.
To be honest with you, if you go back and look at that pace projector, they have, I believe, the 7, the 8, and the 10 sort of lined up
Correct.
across the way. If you withdraw the 7 and you slot the 8 and the 10 over, I know it's a little bit of a difficult ask from the 4 post. I'd like Johnny V to take up the position that they had there, about 3 wide on the outside, sit off of those 2 horses, because Copper Bullet, look, he may be a very talented runner. I'm not sold about the 9 furlongs with him, and he does have a little bit of early positional speed. I think he gets into the run and pushes Mr. Buff enough. And again, if this proves a little bit too much for him to ask, I think Noble Indy could have a very, very comfortable position. Now, the question is, do you think he can still run? And I'm not going to argue with anyone that says he simply can't, because his last 4 races have been unmitigated disasters. But like you said, that most recent run, I'm looking at that as nothing more than shaking the rust off, getting him ready to go. We know the fairgrounds isn't an issue for him, and he has a little bit of tactical speed. I trust Pletcher when he ships into Louisiana. This is usually a solid thing. Johnny V's there. I'll take a chance with Noble Indy.
15-1 on the morning line for Noble Indy. Matt's top selection. Give me some numbers.
4, 11, 8, 6.
I'm going to go with Mr. Buff in here. 8, 10, 6, 11 in the Grade 2 Orleans Handicap. One of several graded stakes races at the fairgrounds on Saturday. It has an approximate post of 334 Central. Good luck.